All right. I think this is live. All right, you guys. Welcome. We'll do the Saturday recap today. I know I've been kind of combining days, but there seemed enough going on yesterday to kind of give today its own video, and hopefully it won't take too long. But I think there's a good amount of races that are worth going through and talking about a little bit, just as far as how the race played out and some things to look at going forward. So let's kind of start off with some trends. So yesterday was pretty good day for Steve Asmussen. He had 4 winners on the 10 race card, and then a couple other horses that ran well, and a couple horses to look forward to or look ahead to. And then Joe Sharp had a couple wins yesterday as well. So those are just a couple trainer trends. I mean, both those trainers, they're no real surprise. They get good stock. They do good work. They place their horses well. They employ good jockeys. So for their win percentage to be what it is and to have a lot of winners, I mean, it makes sense. But again, that can also be, you want to follow those trends because they can go hot and cold. We're going to kind of see that a little bit already this meet. Like Diodoro in the first part, he had pretty much everything he was sending out. It was just tough to look past, and a couple spots with shippers and droppers that you just couldn't ignore. And now we're kind of seeing those horses run back, and some of them regressing, some of them running well, just kind of depending on where they're placed. But they're not kind of given as sort of the strong type that they were earlier in the meet. So let's start off with race number 1. And I think, it's kind of worth talking about. I know it's a maiden special weight race, sort of a compact field, but the winner of the race I thought was turned out a pretty good effort. She ran a big effort on the front end, was kind of ridden out of the gate, paced a little bit soft early, and then finished up well by open lengths. Briefly flipped leads, but good debut effort for this John Sadler trainee. He hasn't sent out too many first-time starters that I'm aware of, at least none that I can really think of offhand. I could probably look that up, but she earned a pretty solid optic speed figure for that effort, and then really dominant, well out in front of the second place finisher. Kind of an even effort from her. That's the number 3 Cynical Girl. Again, another. She's making her first start. Let's see here, coming back. Off the layoff, a little bit of a break, finishing second at Hawthorne. Overall, the rest of the field was pretty much below, but just kind of something to keep an eye on. Again, a big effort from her. We'll kind of see where, obviously pretty well met. We'll see where she shows up going forward. So another, I guess I'd say probably as far as following trends, the second race, the winner, Peter Urton, I think he's been pretty live this meet, to be honest. He hasn't sent out that many horses, but the ones that he has, especially making their first start at Oaklawn, have been kind of pretty well placed and very well met, and results-wise, that's come true as well. So in race 2, he sent out the number 5 Dukes Up. He's making his first start back in about 3 months. Again, well placed, got the right trip. Christie's co-pilot, no real excuse for him. Kind of that free trip, first run, and just just unable to hold, which is that's sort of his style, I guess. The rest of the field, I think, was pretty average. A lot of C pluses in there. A lot of horses we've already seen this meet that are just kind of like they're knocking around at this level, and they're just kind of hard to place or push going forward. Which kind of moves us into race 3. Again, I talked about Steve Asmussen, just kind of start off in video. He sent out the winner of this race. Pull up this chart here. The number 7 Impact Player. Strong effort on the front end. Did get that lone trip. Did get kind of a soft early pace, and then came home pretty quick. So good effort there, and then kind of some even efforts underneath. Mr. Uncanny, I guess he's worth talking about a little bit because he probably could have been the controlling speed in here, but under Joe Talamo broke slow, made a move through traffic. I think there's some upside off that trip, and then probably, he wants to be more forwardly placed. So depending on where he's placed, what kind of rail draw he gets, what kind of draw he gets, we could see that going forward. I talked about Peter Urton. He sent out, or he, let me back this up just a little bit because I know this is one of his horses. Sorry, you guys. I want to make sure I'm reading this properly. When talking about the number 5 here, Platinum Nights, because he's making his second start of the meet. His first start of the meet, again, this kind of follows what I was saying about Peter Urton earlier. He brought Platinum Nights back on February 14th off a 77-day layoff. Won, was kind of well spotted, 25 N2L. Won, good trip, was able to save ground under Martin Garcia. He was claimed out of that race by Villafranco. Brought him back in 2 weeks and then bumped him up in class. So again, he cleared the condition, that N2L, so he's got to run at the N3L. But then again, he ran for this much higher price tag. So that's kind of one of those races that he ran a C+, but I would just kind of almost draw a line through that because he's just not where he belongs to compete. I think that's important when you're looking at form cycle all around, is you can kind of see he finished 7th, but was he really meant in this spot? Was he really placed in the right spot? I know I talked about yesterday's video talking about that optics figure range. If we go back to that February 14th race, that claiming 25 N2L, the optics figure range, 76 on the low end, 84 on the high end. Yesterday's optics figure range had 85 on the low end. So that's the low end is higher than the high end on the previous race, and 93 on the top end. So you can just kind of tell from that perspective, this is a class level that's going to be tough for him, especially if the other horses show up. All right, so let's move on. Race 4. Another Steve Asmussen winner, kind of a different trip on him. This race was really fast early, pretty solid in the middle, and then came home fast, which did help out the winner, who kind of got like a really nice, smart ride by Santana, kind of classic Santana, stalked, made his move, had first run. It did have that pace to move into. The second place finisher, Hunt the Frost. He had ran better than looked effort in his previous start, broke slow, made a move, ran on late, or General Trev had the first jump, but a solid effort. I graded both those horses Bs. They were just kind of well out in front, just looked a little bit superior to the rest of the field. But again, a flow-weighted trip, given that pace scenario. So horses that set the pace in there, I wouldn't be like super harsh on them going forward. Those being the number 2, Pine Knoll. Who else is part of that pace? Number 3, Shack's Way. Shack's Way was actually favored. Let's see, slightly favored over the number 8. So maybe a little bit of upside there, just kind of given the pace going forward. I know a Special Day, he kind of had an interesting trip. I wouldn't necessarily say it was trouble. He was on hold early, had mile contact in the first turn, but then he kind of drifted out on the far turn with really not a whole lot of excuse. It didn't really seem that he handled being behind horses, so that could have been a factor. But, kind of overall, it was kind of just like, you want to see a little bit more from these horses. I know they're still maidens, but at this level, a lot of that stuff isn't really excuse worthy. I'm going to skip race 5. If there's anything you guys want to talk about in race 5, send me a message. Make sure it's nobody on chat. Want to talk about anything in race 5, and we'll move on to race 6. This is the first of the Joe Sharp winners on the card. Let's get those going here. A little bit slow to load this page. All right, here we go. Thank you. All right, so Classy Act, again, the first of the Joe Sharp winners on the card. We had a blanket finish in this race, and I think that's important to note because you kind of want to separate these horses a little bit when they're all finishing on the wire together. We had the top 6 horses were at a blanket on the wire, and then as far as optics figures, the number 4, Classy Act, the winner of this race, and the number 8, both those horses were given a preliminary 97 optic speed figure. And then the 3rd through 6th were given a 96. So there's not a whole lot of separation on these horses. And that's pretty much how they raced. Maybe, Classy Act, I thought that was kind of a little bit of a gritty effort because took pressure and stayed on best of the speed, lost the lead late, a little bit deep stretch, and then kind of had to dig in a little bit to get the win. Maybe that's something when a trainer has, a hot day or they're on a streak, maybe it's a little bit more of the hot than the grit, but still, if there's still 3 chords, Caliente Candy, Headland, Raintree Starlet, kind of tough to split from there. Which goes into race 7, another Steve Asmussen winner, I believe. Let's pull up the chart here. So a best of the speed winner for Steve Asmussen. Now this is a horse that was coming back, was making first start for this barn. I'm going to kind of refresh. We can go through these races. Making her first start for this barn. Had been with Bob Baffert before. She ran a decent race on debut at Los Alamitos last summer, a B-. I mean, I know a lot of Bafferts, they win early, so sometimes that can be kind of tough when they don't. But again, just keep in mind, she was a 3-year-old. He doesn't really debut a whole lot of 3-year-olds, kind of mostly the juvenile program. Second time out at Del Mar, coming back 2 weeks later. First was part of the early pace, was kind of the first to quit of that set. And then had been laid off. So we hadn't seen her since. She'd been off 224 days, came back for Steve Asmussen, rider, things like that to keep in mind. Let me see if there's kind of anything else through here. Seeing some trouble somewhere in there. All right. The number 6, Golden Command. We kind of had some, a little bit of a trip there. Stressful trip, racing in traffic, mid-pack, kind of behind and between horses. Not the most ideal. It's kind of not one of those ones that's real obvious trouble, but it's kind of that like tight elevator analogy where you're packed in there and you're like, just get me to my floor. Like, I just want to get off this thing. And that's kind of what these horses, like when they're in that mid-pack spot, it's like, you're not in trouble, but you're also like, you're not comfortable. You don't want to be there too long. So I think those are some ideal trip there from the outside post. She was actually favored in that race. So maybe some upside going forward there. Now race 8. So this actually worked out kind of a little tight, but got the win. So this is a Shared Sense. And I talked about him based on his trip in the Smarty Jones and the 6th place finish there. Heading into the race, still a maiden, even though he had run really well in his maiden races out in Kentucky, especially those races at Churchill Downs. I mean, you could really make a case he ran as strong as the winner in some of those races, which gave him a look. I mean, Connections were pretty ambitious to run into Stakes Company, and even yesterday, taking on winners as a maiden. But I think they know they have a horse that's got some ability, and he truly does. So back in the Smarty Jones in the mud, he was wide, he was against the flow. You wanted to kind of be inside on that day. Again, it wasn't really like a crazy bias, but certainly those lanes inside kind of moved horses up, and then by contrast, being outside, not as favorable. He was held up early, caught wide from off the pace, and then showed some runs. So it was one of those trips that you just know this is a horse that has upside off this. Things weren't really working out for him that day. Drew was aboard. He's not my favorite off-track rider, to be honest. Overall, he can be kind of hit or miss. He rode pretty well yesterday, but in off tracks, for some reason, he's just not. He just doesn't. Marvin, the best of the speed, right on the wire. Can't fault Marvin at all. He ran a good race. He ran back in an optional allowance race on February 2nd, a B. So he was on the wire with a couple other horses in that race. Big effort from him, wide outside. They had entered him, so they ran yesterday. They had entered him a week ago in an optional, in another type allowance race sprinting. And I kind of was like a little bit concerned it was going to be a short turnaround. And then they ran yesterday going 2 turns. And again, a good effort from him. Very game, those two, especially considering the winner came from off the pace. Pace-wise, I think it did help, even though he was forwardly placed and had some pressure, a little bit of a soft pace, but still those two. As far as Shared Sense, I mean, now that he broke his maiden finally, and he has that experience in Stakes Company, we're probably going to see him in some of the graded stake races, I would imagine, going forward this meet. And I think he has some upside, some talent. He's doesn't have a lot in terms of early speed, as we've seen. So he's a little bit maybe pace compromised at times. So just kind of something to keep in mind. But I could see him being a contender in those races, kind of in the right circumstance. So the last race let's talk about on the card. I'll skip the finale again. If you guys want to write about that, you can. But I think this race is good to talk about. There's a kind of a lot of things to discuss here. I mean, first and foremost was the pace of this race. I mean, they really threw it down on the front end. Very fast early pace, contentious. So we talk about that on this video. The difference between, contentious and speed rating. Sometimes they're separate, sometimes they're together. This one was both. There was 3 horses setting the pace and dueling. I talked about Amy's challenge going back to, I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but she's kind of one of the horses I want to talk about in here because I wrote about her on Brisbane. I thought she'd have like a strong pace advantage when she made her meet debut back on February 1st in the American Beauty, and didn't quite see the early speed that she had shown in the past. And I thought, as these horses get older, sometimes they change their run style, and I think she's going to become more of a tracking type, and that's what happened yesterday. I think that's good for her, even though she didn't get an ideal trip. Traffic, trouble, kind of had to wait for room, got clear late, top 2 together on the wire. So solid effort for Amy's challenge and the winner Midnight Fantasy. But kind of a better than looked effort from her, and definitely encouraging off the American Beauty. Now, Midnight Fantasy, a Joe Sharp winner. So we've already talked about, the 2 winners on the card, kind of sending in live, and kind of got the right trip under the dynamics. I mean, granted, she was wide. She had that pace to track, had the first run, and was able to stay in the clear, something that Amy's challenge did not have the benefit of in that race. And then the 3rd place finisher, What a Fox, kind of the lone closer, picked up the pieces late. I know some people kind of liked her. She was making her 3rd start of the meet. There wasn't really that much to knock, but she did have some favorable trips in her first 2 starts this meet, which is not always, especially when you have a horse that comes from off the pace. It's just something to keep in mind. Was able to close, had that flow to close into. The pace itself, you had number 1, Artistic Diva, who kind of made a good physical impression on the track and then kind of got a little bit anxious before the race. Number 2, Mount Brave, a best of the credit considering the race flow. And then Break Even, who is actually the favorite here. She was part of the pace, was wide outside of horse, and just didn't really stick around. She was making her first start back off a 182-day layoff. So I think that's probably, given the layoff, given the ground loss, the fast pace, kind of one of those races I wouldn't really hold that too much against her. Probably going to get a lot of fitness out of that, and some upside coming out. So I think kind of overall a good kind of stakes race yesterday. Sort of what you want to see. Some horses throw down, and then the 2 horses that are finish 1-2 put in a good effort. So yesterday, good day of racing at Oaklawn Park. We'll be back today, Sunday. I wrote up 3 races on Brisnet. So I follow those, some handicapping, not just picks, but a lot of handicapping, some technique in there, some good stuff. And then over at Optics EQ, again, the Santa Anita race of the day. I know Chris was kind of digging through the PPs and already started to tweet some stuff out. So he'll probably have something on the website. So overall, a lot of good racing there. Make sure you register, log in, all that good stuff. It's free. I think that's it. So you guys will check back later in this week. Good luck today.